of all, welcome to Teachers College. And this event is sponsored by the Studies in Educational Innovation. And I just want to say one little word about that. One of the things I've tried to do in my 22 years here, after leaving high school, teaching 23 years, so that sort of dates me now about, I should be more than retired by now, is to establish a place, which is the Center for the Professional Education of Teachers, where doctoral students here who come from these fabulous teaching experiences from all over the world have opportunities not only to research, but to actually take that research into action in the world and establish some various projects. So what Deb Soch, Allison Kim, Villanueva have done as part of their doctoral work was to begin looking with the help of Scarsdale, who were our collaborators and supporters in the project, at 6 countries and the ways in which they were thinking about innovations in education. So that was the sort of research part. Now the other part was sort of taking that work into the world. So now doctors, Deb and Allison, no longer doctoral students, have been working with a variety of districts internationally and more locally to try out some of the things that we were learning as we engaged in the work with Scarsdale. So today we're going to hear from Scarsdale and see the various ways in which they've continued their work around innovations and more global capacities of thinking, and ways in which in the engagements with Weston and with Westport in very different ways, how studies in educational innovation with all of these wonderful partners continue this, what we think is quite an important dialogue. So after initial research, when they took their learning into the classrooms, we really started to think about how do we rethink how to educate our children, ourselves, and others in this ever-expanding and interconnected landscape in which we learn, live, and ultimately are responsible. So to just start this day for a couple of minutes, what I'd like to do, and I'm grateful you all made it here. My understanding is some of you had easier journeys than others. Westport just arrived and slipped in the door after being rear-ended on their way. Other trips seem more so welcome, and we're glad you're here. So take a minute and breathe. And I want to just have you focus for a minute on this image. This ever-spinning globe we have. I draw your attention to it. I think it's a reality and a metaphor for the work we need to imagine as educators. Truth is, there are many voices to be heard. We can see them modulated in this little toy or tool of capacity we have. How do we imagine? What are those voices saying? Some are louder than others. Some are asking questions. Many of us are asking questions. Some of us are offering answers. I'm not so comfortable with those. Many of the educators are involved in the day-to-day actions of educating, and I think that's where you come in, right? It's in the day-to-dayness of the work, is the way we walk the future rather than talking the future. So I'm trying to think of the ways in which we do those kinds of engagements. So I see a key motivation, I think, behind this rhetoric of 21st century education, because I have no idea what it means. I thought maybe 20th century I understood, but I didn't. And so I wonder what all that means, but I think there's a motivation behind this, and I think it's our restlessness. To continually wonder and imagine and say, what's next? What should we try? What should we do? Not just for the restlessness, but to say, how do we help imagine these futures that we can't quite imagine? How do we help invent those futures? How do we educate ourselves and students into a world where we can engage in the world in new ways, where we can create and invent our futures? That's really our work in education, I think. Now, we may think we've accomplished much on a local level. We may not think we've accomplished much at all. The rhetoric changes daily. Right now we know we're under a new deadline of how to interact in our own nation with the deadline tomorrow, right, on negotiations that we think could have taken place a long time ago. How are we ultimately, if we can't be responsible for ourselves, how are we responsible and how do we take part in the globe? And I would suggest maybe it's in the ways in which we educate, the ways in which we think about the future education of our students. So the big question reminds me in doing this about what Michael Collins said. Do you remember him, the third member of the Apollo 11 team? He writes, when he describes his journey to the stars, "I can now lift my mind out into space and look back at a midget Earth. I can see it hanging there in the restless sunlight. I really believe that if the political leaders of the world could see their planet from a distance of, let's say, 100,000 miles, their outlook could be fundamentally changed. The all-important borders would be invisible. That sudden, noisy argument silenced." Which leads me to another question. How can we, educators, help our students see the globe and their worlds from a distance, from others' points of view, from perspectives offered that we cannot or have not been able to imagine? That is our challenge and our opportunity. It is probably always what education has been for, and maybe now more profoundly. Put in one last way, I'm reminded of a young Rania Bazi, a 15-year-old student from Beirut, who is in one of New York City's classrooms filled with mostly immigrant children. In the past few weeks, I've been working in her class on a project called Filling in the Landscapes of Our Globe. Of course, those are real for those students. This is a class of young people who have lived all over the world and experienced it in the local details of people's, places, hopes, a globe teeming with lived and living experiences. With these students is heir to thousands of years of histories, of places they can shut their eyes and see and feel, of languages nearly incomprehensible to others in the room. These students are mapping the light places on the globe, the places they have lived and their families have lived and worked and know. And last week, Rania, near bursting, said something I think that is very simple but very profound. Quote, "We are like mental explorers into our own and others' territories. I mean, places on the globe are starting to come into view. I'm on the edge of seeing. I'm not fully seeing," she says. "I'm on the edge of how so many other people are living and feeling in this world." It's like, that is really worth doing. That is the point, isn't it? It is worth doing. Our futures depend on it. So we're delighted to be in conversation with many of you deeply, and some of you we're hoping to be in conversations with about how we continue to do this work in meaningful ways. Welcome. Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Again, I'm Deb Soch, and on behalf of Allison Villanueva, who's back there, and all of Teachers College, we want to welcome you. And I especially want to thank our partners from Scarsdale, from Westport and Weston and Finland, who are here today to share their stories about transformational change for the 21st century, what that looks like, what it means, what the vision that they set in their own district looks like in action. And you'll see very varied perspectives and ways into the work. It's actually pretty fascinating how a district can say, I want to engage in 21st century teaching and learning. This is what I think it could look like in my district with my big 10 key stakeholders that include teachers, leaders, parents, students, everybody who's accountable for the success of engaging students to fully participate in the world. That's what matters, and that's what our charge is as educators. And so you'll see these great experiences and initiatives going on in each of the schools. So our goal today was to bring together these disparate thinkers to engage in conversation, and many of you may be along the continuum of preparing your students for 21st century. Some of you may not have set a vision at all. Some of you have a vision, you've begun to put into place the pieces and the parts that will move you towards a place that you believe you should be. You have lots of structures that impose upon you to not do that, even though they may suggest that they're intended to do that. So how can we do that, and how have our partners done that today? This is about entrepreneurship and rule breaking, and everyone you hear today will never be accused of complacency. Every single one of these districts has broken the rules about what it means to educate for the 21st century. I want to say, in particular, I want to point out Dr. Mike McGill and then Shane, whose vision 4 years ago, was it? 4 or 5. 4 years ago was, what does world class mean? We are a world class district, but what does that really mean? So here's a district, a public school district that said, we're going to go into the global context for an authentic look at schools and students and teachers, and we want to see what's happening in the classroom. So Scarsdale sent us out to document what was happening in classrooms, to look at student work, to look at instructional practices, and we were in Finland where we met our wonderful Jukka Nyrnen, partner at SEI, a school there, universities in Finland, schools and universities in Shanghai, Singapore, Australia, Canada, and Scarsdale. A really fabulous, rich landscape to see what is happening when you talk about world class. So that vision, that work, obviously informed all of the work that they're doing and our work as well. So we are grateful for that vision and what they are doing. And you'll see their work with the Scarsdale Center of Innovation, which is quite a groundbreaking initiative in that district. And they will be the first people you'll hear from. You'll also hear from Westport, who set a vision for this global student of 2025. You'll see how the entire district created a common language around a common framework and created professional learning communities in order to enact what that looks like in curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and in the ways of working. So even now, students in the district speak that language, parents in the district speak that language, and there's full alignment across the district. You'll hear too from Weston, Connecticut, who engaged in a 3-year project with us on cornerstone assessments, performance-based cornerstone assessments. And you'll see too that when cornerstone assessments developed and designed for the 21st century completely inform daily curricular practices, how you instruct students on the day, how you assess of, for, and as learning. So you'll see how that happened in Weston. And finally, you'll hear from our partners in Finland, the hottest education nation in the world, and we're going to hear the secrets of their success and see what we can learn from our partners in Finland. So thank you for being here. And thank you all for being here today.